Hi everyone and welcome back. In today's video, we are going to discuss about the instance store volumes. Now, before we discuss about an instance store volume, it is important for us to revise the basic architecture of EBS. This will give us better clarity and quick understanding about the benefits that instance store volume provides. Now, one thing that needs to be noted is that the EBS volumes are network attached storage for the EC2 instances. And this is the reason why, in case if you stop and start your EC2 instance, it may run on a different physical host because ultimately it is like a virtual machine. But the EBS data stays intact because it is stored separately from the instance. Let's understand this through a diagram. It will give better clarity. So let's consider that underlying to the AWS data center, there are two physical servers that are available. And on top of the physical servers, you have the virtualization layer. Now, whatever EC2 instance that you create, ultimately they are like the virtual machines. So they are virtual machines running on the underlying host. Now, when we discuss about the EBS volumes, they are separate. They are not part of the underlying server. Now, since they are separate, they are attached to the specific EC2 instance through the network over here. And this is the reason why when you stop the EC2 instance, it can happen that it will not start back in the same underlying host. It might start in another host over here. Now, if the EC2 instance is now running in a different physical server, what about the data? You don't really have to worry because your data is in the EBS volumes that are separate from the underlying servers. And this EBS volume will then be network mounted to the EC2 instance that you have in the different host over here. So this is the basic architecture. Now, when we discuss about the instance store volumes, what happens is that the server on top of which you have virtual machines that are running, this server will also have some form of storage. So instance store volumes are basically the storage that are associated with the underlying host, and you mount that storage to the EC2 instance over here. So this storage is provided by the disks that are physically attached to the host. Alright, so here note that it is not that once you have EBS attached, you cannot have the instance store volume attached. You can have both the EBS volumes attached to the instance as well as the instance store volumes attached to the instance. Now the question that comes is, what benefit does the instance store volume provides? They provide a lot of important benefits. Let's discuss about them. Now, one of the great benefit of the instance store volume is related to the performance. These volumes provide low latency and high IOPS because the storage is physically attached to the host. So here, since network mount is not there, you don't really have to worry about the latency. Directly from the host, since they are attached, it is much more faster and it gives great performance. So it is ideal for workloads that needs ultra fast temporary storage. So this point is very important, ultra fast temporary storage. We'll be discussing what exactly this means in just a moment. Second great benefit of instance store volumes is that there is no additional cost. So it is included in the instance price for the supported instance type. There are no extra charges like those for the EBS volumes. Generally for the EBS volumes you pay extra. For instance store volumes you don't have to pay it. Now I've also added a reference architecture diagram directly from the documentation. This will also give you better clarity. So you have multiple EC2 instances and there can be multiple set of instance store volumes that can be associated with them. Now before we dive into demo, let's look into the disadvantage. One of the important disadvantage is that it does not provide any data persistence. In case if you stop and start your EC2 instance, or in case if the instance gets terminated or it fails, then all of the data that you have stored in the instance store volume will be lost. So let's quickly understand this point of data persistence because this is the most important disadvantage here. So in the first slide, we were discussing that if a EC2 instance is running in the underlying host number 2, and if you stop the EC2 instance and you start it again, it can happen that the instance might run in a different underlying host server altogether. Now, if it is running in a different underlying host, the storage that was associated with the instance store volume, it was with the host number 2. It is not with the host number 1, and this is the reason why whatever data that you must have stored in the instance store volume of the host number 2, that data will be lost if you stop and start the EC2 instance. The second disadvantage is the limited availability. Not all of the instance types support instance store volumes. And third disadvantage is that there is no resizing or migration. you cannot resize the instance store volume or move them to another instance. So let's go ahead and have a demo. This will give us better clarity. Now for today's demo, I have a EC2 instance that uses the instance store volumes. Now generally what happens is when you look into our earlier demo, most of our instance uses the instance type of T2 micro or T3 micro. Now for this specific demo, we had to use the larger instance type of R3.large. Why? Because of the second point that you see in the disadvantage, which states that not all instance type supports instance store volumes. So there are supported instance types. Only for those instance type you will see the instance store volumes. Let me also quickly show you how do you find instances that has the instance store volume. Now whenever you launch a EC2 instance over here, based on the instance type, if you go to the storage over here, you will see whether the instance store volume is available or not. For example, for the T2 micro, there is no instance store volume that is available. However, if you go with other type like say R3.large, when you go a bit down, you see you got a new option of instance store volume, and if you look into the details associated with it, it shows you how much size of volume that you have. Now again, for a specific instance type, you cannot customize the size of instance store volume. Whatever is available, you can get it, and as we know, you can get it for free, so why not take it? So for this instance type, there is a size of 32 GB of instance store volume that is available. And this instance that we had created, let's go back. This instance, as we see, it is R3.large, so it has the instance store volume. Now let me show you. Let's quickly connect to the instance here. Now currently I am connected to the server. Now if I run the df-h command, you see that this is the instance store volume that we were discussing, and this is mounted on a path of fast storage. So if you go to the fast storage folder here, whatever data that you store in this specific folder will be stored in the instance store volume. Now we were discussing about the disadvantage of instance store volume, where if you stop and start the instance, your data will be lost. But if you restart the EC2 instance, your data will not be lost, because when you restart, the instance will come up in the same underlying host. So let's do one thing. Let's create a file called as test.txt. We'll understand the workflow. Once this file is created, let's clear the screen. We'll reboot the EC2 instance over here. So currently we have been logged out of the instance. Let's quickly wait for a moment for the instance to come up again. Great. So after a minute, let's try to connect to the EC2 instance once again. And we are connected. Now let's quickly go to the fast storage over here. And if I do a ls, you see we have test.txt file that is still available. So for reboot, it is completely fine. Now let's test one more thing. Let's go ahead and stop and start the EC2 instance. We'll see if our data still remains in such cases. So I'll do it from the console. So let's quickly stop the EC2 instance over here. It is in the stopping state. Let's quickly wait for a moment here. Great. So now our instance is stopped. So let's do one thing. Let's go ahead and start the EC2 instance again. I'll click on start EC2. Let's refresh, and it is running. Let's copy the public IP of the instance. So now let's quickly connect to the EC2 instance again. And within here, if I'll quickly go to the fast storage directory, if I do a ls, you see our data is lost. So all of the data that you might have stored in the instance store volume will be lost. Alright, so I hope with this at an overview, you have started to understand about the instance store volume. One of the great benefit is that it is very fast, but the issue is that in case if the instance stops and starts, then the data is ephemeral. So this is the reason why, in case if you intend to store the instance store volume, make sure that you either store some temporary data over here. In case if it gets lost, you will not be impacted. Or in case if you have some important data, make sure that you back up your data to some centralized storage like S3 or to the EBS volumes. Lot of organizations, they make use of instance store volumes because these volumes are very fast and it improves the performance without any additional cost. Now just for reference, I have also added the data persistence table. So in case if instance reboots, data persists. In case if instance stops, terminates, or the instance type is changed, the data does not persist. Before we conclude, few more additional pointers that you have to keep a note of. First one is that the number, the size and type of instance volumes that are available are determined by the instance type. Depending upon the instance type, the appropriate size of the instance store volume will be made available to you. You do not have a flexibility here. And not every instance type provides the instance store volume. This is something that we saw. For example, let's take one example, M5AD.8x large. So let's do one thing. Let's launch an instance. In fact, we are not going to launch the instance, but I wanted to show you M5AD dot. Let's go a bit down. Let's take this 192 GB of memory and 48 vCPU. So for this larger instance type over here, the instance store volume that will be available, you see there are two volumes that are available. Volume number 2 is of 900 GB. Volume number 3 is of 900 GB. So it all depends upon the instance type that you choose. For some instance type, you might get one volume. For some instance type that are quite expensive, you will get two volumes with a larger size over here. Great. So that's the overview about the instance store volume. I hope this topic is very clear now, and with this we'll conclude today's video.